Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into Everrain.
Ooh.
Everrain, a board game that I think a lot of our listeners are very excited about.
Yes,
They're
definitely.
really excited to get into it. And the reason we're doing this episode is because one of you wonderful listeners sent in the rule book to us, and we're going to deep dive into it.
Yeah, we're going to crack it open to see what's inside.
Yeah. So, the basic premise of the game, it looks like, is that it's this co-op game where you are a captain of a ship in, like, a drowning world.
Right.
And there's this ancient evil that's coming to, like...
Yeah, it's like
finish flooding the world or something like that.
Yeah.
And you're trying to stop it. And there are a bunch of, like, cool things that look like they're going on. You can, like, upgrade your ship. You can get different crew members.
Yeah.
And there's this whole thread of the Elder Ones. So, okay, let's jump into the rule book here and then
let's do it.
See what we can uncover.
Absolutely.
So the first thing it looks like we need to talk about is like the basic objective of the game.
Okay, so the core objective of Everrain is to prevent an Elder One from awakening and completing its objective. Because if it completes its objective, then the Great Flood happens, and everyone's doomed.
So it's like preventing the apocalypse.
It is preventing the apocalypse.
Okay,
yeah.
So how do players actually win?
Okay, so players win by reaching the end of the discovery track before the enemy does, or before an Elder One awakens and completes its objective.
So there's like a track that everyone's racing on.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
right.
And then how do players lose?
Okay, so players lose if the enemy reaches the end of the discovery track first, or if an Elder One completes its objective.
So it's like a two-pronged...
It's a two-pronged loss condition, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So we're talking about this discovery track.
Yeah.
Looks like there are also some other things in play here, like clues. So what are clues?
So clues are this really important part of the game. You gather them throughout the game, and then you can turn those clues in at ports to advance your player discovery.
Okay, so like as you're exploring, you're like, oh, I found a clue.
Right.
And then you can use that to like progress.
Exactly.
Yeah, gotcha. And so there's also this agenda track. What is that all about?
So the agenda track, that's how the enemy progresses through the game.
Oh, okay.
And it advances every round, basically.
Oh, okay.
So every round the agenda track advances, and that pushes the enemy along the discovery track.
So it's like you're trying to get clues to progress, but the enemy is like automatically progressing every round.
Every round.
Okay. Yeah. So this discovery track, it looks like it's kind of like the...
It is kind of like the
main scoreboard for like how everyone's doing.
Yeah. So the discovery track is basically a visual representation of how everyone's doing. So it shows your progress as the players, and it shows the enemy's progress, and it shows how close the Elder One is to waking up. And it's divided into 4 acts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what are acts?
So acts are basically like chapters in the game.
Okay.
So the whole game is divided into 4 acts. And at the end of each act, something different happens depending on if the players got to the end of the act or if the enemy got to the end of the act first.
Okay, so it's like a big turning point at the end of each act.
It is.
Okay, cool. So we're sailing along on this track, and we need to talk about our ship because obviously this is a seafaring game.
Big part of the game.
Yes.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about the ship.
Okay, so your ship is your base of operations, right? It's your home on the ocean, and it's divided into 2 main areas. You got on deck and below deck.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start with on deck. What's going on up there?
On deck is where all the action is. So on deck, you've got 10 zones where you can place miniatures. So that would be like your crew or any enemies that you've got on your ship.
Okay.
And each of these zones has a node in the center of it.
Okay.
And these nodes are important because they allow you to do things with your ship.
So like what kind of things?
So like, for example, you've got navigation nodes, which let you sail around the world. You've got artillery nodes, which let you attack other ships. You've even got a node for your crow's nest, which lets you reveal new map tiles.
Oh, that's cool. So you're like assigning crew to like different stations?
You're assigning your crew, yeah.
To like make the ship function.
Exactly.
Okay. So what happens if like a node gets destroyed?
Yeah. So that's not good.
I imagine not.
No. So if a node gets destroyed, like through an enemy attack or maybe some bad event happens, you cover it with a destruction token, and then it doesn't work anymore until you get it repaired. And it's actually even worse than that, because if your crew or if there are any enemies in that zone, when it's destroyed, they all suffer trauma.
Yeah. So you really don't want your nodes to get destroyed.
No, you do not.
Okay.
No.
So that's on deck. What's happening below deck?
So below deck is more like where the strategy happens.
Okay.
So below deck, you've got 6 slots for improvement cards. And those improvement cards are basically how you upgrade your ship.
Okay, so this is where you, like, make your ship reload.
Yeah, this is where you trick out your ship.
Okay, cool. So what kind of upgrades are we talking about here?
You can upgrade it in a bunch of different ways. Like, you can make it into, like, a warship with lots of guns, or you can make it into a trading vessel that has a lot of cargo space or something in between. And you do that using improvements in artillery cards.
So, like, depending on what you want your ship to be good at, you can
customize it.
Customize it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. And where do these upgrades come from?
So you find the upgrades throughout the game as schematics.
Okay.
And then if you have a schematic, you can take it to the shipwright when you're at a port and get it installed.
Oh.
Yeah, or you can sell them.
Oh, so they're, like, valuable.
They are valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so we've tricked out our ship. How do we actually move it around the board?
Okay, so your ship moves around the board by spending navigation points. And you get navigation points by issuing a navigation order.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like you say, I'm issuing a navigation order.
Yeah.
And then you get some points.
And you get some points
that you can spend.
That you can then spend to move.
Yeah.
So you can spend them to turn your ship.
Okay.
You can spend them to move to a new space. You can even spend them to reveal new map tiles.
So like if you're really exploring, you need to like issue...
You got to spend those navigation points.
A lot of navigation orders.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And what happens if your ship sinks?
Ooh, so that's bad.
I would think so.
But you're not out of the game. Your ship is destroyed, obviously. You lose all your schematics, all your treasures, everything that you got on board. But then you get to choose a new ship from the shipwreck pile, and you start again.
Okay, so it's like a setback.
It's a major setback.
But
it's not the end of the game.
The end of the world.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. So we're sailing around in our ship. We need to talk about our crew.
Yes, the crew.
Because obviously you can't run a ship without...
Yes, they're very important.
Oh, the crew. So tell me about those brave souls.
So the crew. You got to have a crew to sail your ship. And there are 2 different kinds of crew. There's deckhands and shellbacks.
Okay.
So deckhands were more common. They're kind of the weaker crew members. Shellbacks are the stronger crew members that have special abilities.
So it's like the basic crew and then like the specialists.
The specialists.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you get crew? Like where do they come from?
So you can hire crew from the inn when you're in port.
Oh.
You can also sometimes find them through different events.
Okay.
And you have to pay your crew at the end of every act.
Oh.
Or sometimes during events.
You keep time.
You got to keep them happy.
Happy, yeah.
And if you can't afford to pay them, they leave.
Okay, so you got to keep track of your...
You got to keep track of your money.
Money.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that shellbacks have special abilities. Is there anything else that like makes crew members unique?
Yes. So all crew members, they also have traits.
Okay.
And these traits are like randomized, and they can be good or bad.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it can really change the way the game plays out.
So it's like you might have a really strong crew member, but he's got a bad trait that makes him
exactly right. You might have a really strong sailor, but he's also really susceptible to seasickness.
Right, or something like that.
Exactly. Okay.
And so where do these traits apply? Like, do they only apply in combat?
So they can apply in a bunch of different ways. They can be sea traits. So they only apply at sea.
Okay.
They can be expedition traits, which only apply on expeditions. Port traits, which only apply in ports.
Okay.
Or a general trait.
So it could be like really
could be
specific or kind of...
Could be anything.
Anywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So we were talking about shellbacks having special abilities.
Yeah. So shellbacks have something called an indelible trait.
Okay.
Which is basically like their main thing. It's a really powerful trait that they have that can't be removed or replaced.
So it makes them super special.
Super special, makes them really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last thing about the crew.
Okay.
We've talked about how they can get hurt and they can leave if you don't pay them.
Right.
Is there anything else that can like happen to your crew?
So as well as like, dying in combat.
Right.
Your crew can suffer from trauma and strain.
Okay. What do those?
So trauma is like physical damage.
Oh, okay.
So like if they get hurt in a fight or something, and strain is more like mental damage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's like
the stress of being on this journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so
And if their trauma track fills up, or if their strain track fills up, then they die.
Oh, so you got to keep them.
You got to keep them healthy.
Healthy both mentally and physically.
Mentally and physically.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So we've got our ship. We've got our crew.
Yep.
We're sailing around on this discovery track. How do we actually explore the map in this game?
So the map is divided up into different spaces. You've got sea spaces and land spaces.
Oh.
Yeah. So sea spaces are like, calm seas, rough seas, shipwrecks, that sort of thing.
Okay. So calm seas are like...
Calm seas are nice and easy.
Easy to travel through. You just sail right through them.
Okay.
No problem.
And then rough seas, I imagine, are a little bit tougher.
Yeah, they're a bit tougher because it costs you double the navigation points to move through them.
Oh, so you really got to watch out.
You got to plan your route.
Where are those?
Yeah.
Okay. And it looks like there are also storms on the map. What are those all about?
So storms are like these big hazards that spawn at the beginning of every act.
Oh.
And they're bad news because they make it really hard to move through them.
Okay.
Like they can damage your ship. They can disrupt your line of sight.
Oh, so you can't even see through them.
No, you can't see through
But
them.
attack?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, okay.
They're bad news.
So how do storms move? Do they, just randomly move around?
So during the enemy phase, you roll the fate die, and it tells you how the storm moves.
Okay.
Sometimes it moves towards the first player.
Oh.
Sometimes the players get to choose where it moves.
Okay. So it's like a little bit...
It's a little bit random.
Yeah.
But you might have a little bit of control over it.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So we've talked about all these sea spaces. What about land spaces?
So land spaces, the most important one is the ports.
Okay.
Because ports are basically your safe havens.
Okay.
So this is where you go to trade, to repair your ship, to rest your crew, to turn in those clues that you've been gathering.
So it's like a...
Yeah, it's like a little town where you can go and
Yeah, so like a safe place.
Yeah, just take a break.
Exactly.
Okay.
And each of the ports offers different services as well.
Oh, okay. So they're not all the same?
No, they're not all the same.
Like what kind of things do they offer?
So, for example, you've got the shipwright, where you can install those upgrades that we talked about.
Okay.
You've got the marketplace, where you can buy and sell stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the apothecary, where you can heal your crew.
Okay.
You've got the university, where you can study and learn new things. And you've got the inn, where you can hire crew.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's
So each port is different.
a lot of variety.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And it looks like there's something called Denizens at the ports?
Yes.
What are those all about?
So denizens are basically special encounters that you can have.
Oh.
So when you're in port,
Okay.
you can choose to interact with a denizen.
Okay.
And it might give you some special service or something like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, what kind of things?
It could be anything. It could be like a wise old sailor who's willing to share some of his knowledge with you.
Okay.
Or it could be a shady merchant who's got something that you need, but you might have to pay a high price for it.
So you got to kind of figure out who to trust and who not to.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got ports.
Right.
And then there are also islands.
Yes.
On the map.
Nice.
What are those all about? So you can send your crew to the islands to go on expeditions.
Okay.
And on an expedition, you might find treasure, you might find clues, you might find new schematics.
Oh, so it's like you're sending them to side quests.
To explore?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. And then last thing on the map,
Okay.
it looks like there are altars.
Ah, yes, the altars.
What are those all about?
So altars are bad news because when you enter a tile with an active altar, an enemy spawns on your ship.
Oh, man.
And the only way to purge the altar
Okay.
is to actually go to it.
Okay.
And then that spawns even more enemies.
So it's like a catch-22.
Yeah. It's risky.
You got to spawn the enemies to get rid of the altar.
Yeah, you got to get rid of it, though, because otherwise it just keeps spawning enemies.
Oh, so it's like a constant
threat.
threat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then there's also shipwrecks, but we don't really need to get into those.
Okay. So shipwrecks are just kind of they're just kind of there.
There.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Everrain.
Yes.
So far, we've explored the objectives of the game, talked about our ships and our crew, figured out how to get around this flooded world.
All right.
But one thing we haven't talked about yet is combat.
Ah.
Yes.
So the fun part.
The fun part, yeah.
Yeah.
So it looks like there are two main types of combat in Everrain. There's on-deck combat, which is these frays that happen,
Right.
and then there's combat at sea, which is like with your ship's artillery.
Yes, exactly.
So let's start with the frays.
Okay.
Because honestly, when I was reading about these, I was picturing like swashbuckling duels on the deck.
Yeah, it's very cinematic.
Yeah, like very exciting.
Yeah, it is.
So how do these frays actually work?
Okay, so a fray happens if your crew enters a zone where there are already enemies, or if the enemies attack your crew. And when that happens, you assemble a dice pool based on the strength of your crew members that are involved in the fray.
Okay, so like if you have a really strong crew member, they'll contribute more dice to the pool.
They'll have more dice, exactly.
Okay, and then what happens? You just roll the dice.
So then you roll your dice and you compare your results to the enemy's results.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of results can you get?
So you can get damage, which is pretty straightforward. You know, you deal damage to your opponent.
Okay.
You can get critical damage, which is even better. That deals double damage.
Okay.
And then there are these things called omen results.
Okay, what are those?
So omens are kind of like wild cards. You could spend an order to convert an omen into another result, like damage or evade.
So it's like you have a little bit of control over
a little bit of control.
The outcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's the blank, which doesn't do anything. And then you've got evade, which is really important because that lets you cancel out enemy damage.
Oh, so that's how you...
That's how you protect your crew.
Protect yourself.
Yeah, right.
So you're rolling these dice. You're trying to get damage.
Yep.
You're trying to get evades to block.
They're trying not to get hit.
Their damage.
Right.
And then these omen results give you a little bit of like...
A little bit of flexibility.
Wiggle room.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other like special things that can happen during a fray?
So some crew members and some enemies have special abilities that they can use during a fray.
Like what kind of things?
It could be all sorts of things. Like they could disarm an enemy.
Okay.
They could push an enemy into a dangerous zone.
Uh-oh.
They could even call for reinforcements.
So it's like every crew member has their own kind of like fighting style?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so while all this is happening, you have to be careful because you're on a ship.
Right. You're on a ship. And if a node gets destroyed during a fray, that can really hurt.
So it's like you're fighting,
Yeah.
but you're also trying to protect your ship at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So that's on-deck combat. What about at-sea combat?
So at-sea combat is where you use your ship's artillery to attack other ships.
So this is where like...
This is where those upgrades come in handy.
So big guns come out.
All the big guns.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that work?
So you have to be within range of the enemy ship.
Okay.
And you have to have line of sight.
So like if there's an island in the way?
If there's an island in the way or a storm, you can't shoot them.
Right.
Yeah. So you have to position your ship carefully.
Right.
And then you roll dice based on the strength of your artillery.
Okay. And is there any way to like defend yourself from enemy artillery?
So you can assign crew to your navigation nodes.
Okay.
And each crew member on a navigation node gives you an evade die.
Yeah.
It's like they're helping to steer the ship out of the way of the shots.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that there are these special artillery upgrades that you can get. What are those all about?
So each artillery card has a different range.
Okay.
And a different targeting arc. So some of them are good for long-range combat.
Okay.
Some of them are good for close-range combat.
So you can kind of like specialize.
You specialize, yeah.
Your ship.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So this is all very exciting.
It's fun.
I love the idea of these like big naval battles, but I have to ask, is combat always the best option?
That's a good question.
Because sometimes it seems like it might be better to just like...
It might be better to just run away.
Run away, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes that is the best option.
Okay.
Especially if you're outnumbered or if you're low on supplies.
So how do you avoid combat?
So if you have enemies on your ship, you can banish them by going to a port.
Oh.
But that advances the agenda track. Right.
So it's risky.
It helps you in the short term, but hurts you in the long term.
It hurts you in the long run.
Yeah.
And then if you want to avoid enemy ships, you just have to stay out of their engagement range.
Oh, okay. So it's all about like positioning and...
Positioning and knowing when to fight and when not to fight.
Avoid when to run away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've talked about combat. We've talked about how to avoid combat.
Yeah.
But one thing that we haven't really gotten into yet is the Elder One.
Yes.
The
big bad.
The big bad, yeah. So how does the Elder One actually factor into the game?
So when the Elder One awakens, its board is revealed, and that shows you its objectives and its special abilities.
Oh, so it's like personalized.
It is.
For each Elder One.
Yeah, each Elder One is different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what happens? You just like fight it?
So you can fight the Elder One.
Okay.
But you can't actually kill it.
What you can do is reduce its dice value.
Oh, okay.
So you can weaken it.
So like every time you hit it, it gets weaker.
It gets a little bit weaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I imagine...
And they all have different objectives as well.
Uh-oh.
So it's not just like...
Yeah, it's not just like a generic...
big
bad.
Big bad.
Yeah, it has like...
It's got its own plan.
Its own personality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you're fighting these like smaller enemies. You're trying to avoid combat sometimes.
Right.
And then in the background, you have this Elder One that's looming over everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've covered combat. We've covered the Elder One.
Yep.
But there's one other thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
And that's the storytelling in this game. Because it looks like storytelling is a really big part of Everrain.
Very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the last part of our deep dive, we're going to set aside all this like combat stuff and really get into the narrative of the game.
Let's do it.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So we've talked about a lot of the mechanics of Everrain, you know, the combat, how to upgrade your ship, all that good stuff.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But one thing that we haven't really gotten into yet is like the storytelling aspect of the game.
Yes.
Because it looks like storytelling is a really big...
It's a huge part of the game.
Yeah.
It is.
So I'm excited to kind of like dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
So the first thing that struck me when I was reading the rulebook is that it actually recommends having a narrator.
Oh, yeah.
For the game.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I think is a really cool idea.
It's a really good idea.
So like how does that actually work?
So basically, one player is the narrator.
Okay.
And they're responsible for reading all of the story elements out loud.
So it's like they're reading a book.
It's like they're telling a story.
To the other players?
Yeah.
Okay. And so are these stories just like, you know, things that happen in the background?
So the stories are more than just background. They're actually interactive.
Oh, okay.
So the choices that you make in the game affect how the stories unfold.
So it's like you're writing the story as you go.
You're writing the story, exactly.
Okay. So like what kind of choices are we talking about here?
So you might have to decide whether to help someone who's in trouble.
Okay.
Or you might have to decide whether to take a risk to get a reward.
Oh, so it could be like really impactful. Okay.
Yeah.
And so these stories, are they like one-off things?
No, so the stories are multi-stage.
Oh.
So they kind of unfold over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you might like start a story by doing something, and then later on in the game, that story will like continue.
It'll continue, yeah.
Okay. And the choices that you made earlier will affect what happens. Okay, so it's like
it all ties together.
Very interconnected narrative.
Very dynamic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So we were talking earlier about how some of these stories can actually span multiple decks.
Yeah, so you might start a story in the Sea Event deck.
Okay.
And then it might continue in the Expedition deck.
Oh, wow.
Or even in the Denizen deck.
So it's like the story is like weaving its way.
It's weaving its way through the whole game.
Through the entire game.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So we've talked about stories.
Right.
We've talked about choices. I want to talk a little bit about the enemies in this game.
Okay.
Because obviously every good story needs...
You have some bad guys.
Some bad guys.
Yeah.
So what kind of enemies are we going to encounter in Everrain?
Okay. So there are a bunch of different enemy types. You've got the drowned men, which are the basic enemies.
Okay.
They're not too tough, but there are a lot of them.
So it's like strength in numbers.
Strength in numbers.
Okay.
And then you've got the cultists, which are a bit more tricky because they can mess with your ship's nodes.
Oh, so they're like more strategic.
Okay. And then there's the bloated cadaver, which is just gross.
Okay.
It explodes when it dies, and it damages everything around it.
So you don't want to be anywhere near that thing.
No.
Okay. And I imagine as the game goes on, you encounter even tougher enemies.
Oh, yeah. The enemies get much tougher.
Okay.
So, like in the later acts, you'll encounter the Harbinger.
Okay.
Which is this really fast and deadly enemy that can jump around your ship.
So you can't really...
You can't pin it down.
Pin it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the Worm, which is...
Really just a terrifying name.
It is a scary name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a scary enemy.
Okay.
It's big. It's powerful. It can really hurt your ship.
So this is like a big boss battle?
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, we can't forget about the Elder One.
Right, the Elder Ones.
Which is kind of like the ultimate evil.
The ultimate evil.
In this game.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about them before, but I'm curious to like learn a little bit more about your lore.
Each of the Elder Ones has its own kind of story and its own objectives.
Okay.
So they're not just like generic bad guys.
Right.
They're actually individuals with their own motivations.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it might be like one Elder One is trying to flood the world.
Right.
Another one is trying to like corrupt reality. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really...
And the game doesn't really tell you exactly what their motivations are.
Oh.
It kind of leaves it up to your imagination.
So it's like you're filling in the blanks.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the goal with the Elder One is not necessarily to kill it.
You can't kill it.
But to like...
You have to banish it. Right. Banish it or weaken it.
Yeah, weaken its influence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a
battle for survival.
Yeah, like a desperate struggle.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. This has been a really incredible journey through the world of Everrain.
It has.
I feel like we've covered so much ground.
We barely scratched the surface.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But I think we're going to have to leave it there for today.
Okay.
But thank you so much for...
It's been a pleasure.
Listening to this deep dive.
Yes.
And to all you listeners out there.
Yes.
We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Definitely.
And if you ever find yourself sailing the seas of Everrain, just remember, stay strong, stay together, and watch out for those Elder Ones.
Wise words.
Until next time.